The 70s were a completely different time. The kids would run around the neighborhoods, social media didn't exist, and young kids we wouldn't dream of letting out of our sight today completely ran the town. But normal for one family became anything but normal when an incident occurred and their case would become known as one of New York City's most insane unsolved cases for decades, until recently, almost 40 years later. Hey guys, I'm Elise. This is 10 to Life. Let's jump right in. Alright guys, I have got to take a quick second to talk with you about Temu because it is like all the rage right now. Everybody's talking about it and I'm going to talk to you about it because they have site-wide savings of up to 90% off. There's also free shipping and free returns for up to 90 days. Also, if anything ever arrives late, you get a $5 credit towards future orders. Now, something I also absolutely love that Temu does is so often I'll buy something and then I would notice like a week later or 2 weeks later it goes on sale and I'm like, ugh, I just paid full price. But they actually will do a price adjustment within 30 days of your purchase if anything drops in price. And it doesn't come back as a credit. No, they give you an actual partial refund. Now, I did a haul recently, and let me just show you some of the stuff I got because I am stoked on all of it. I got these amazing soft towels for my kitchen. I got this super cute bedazzled tumbler, but let me talk to you about my absolutely two favorite items that I got with this haul. I got this reusable vacuum tumbler with the straw, and with my code, you can get this for just $9.99. And then I also got this portable foldable washing machine. Now this is perfect for anybody who camps or anybody who travels. Anytime you want to get clean but you don't have a full-scale washing machine, and with my code you can get this for $21.19. So guys, not only am I going to link all of the goods that I got in the description so that you can grab them too, but if you download the Temu app using my link, you will get 50% off your first purchase within the first hour. You can also search my code DKB6565 in the product search bar and you can claim the offer that way if you're not going to use the link to download the app. Guys, there is so much stuff. I could be on this site for hours and hours and hours. But again, quick links to all of the items I snagged will be in the description box. Also, the link to the app so that you can get 50% off your first purchase. Thank you, Temu, for this haul. All right, guys, I need to go hunt some more on their site because there is so much good stuff. What gems have you found? Let me know in the comments. 6-year-old Etan Patz was born on October 9th, 1972 in Manhattan, New York. He was born to his parents, Julie and Stanley Patz. The two of them married in 1965 and had a total of 3 children together. Shira, who was the oldest, Etan, who was the middle child, and Ari, who was the baby of the family. The family was originally from Massachusetts, but they were very into the arts and knew that New York City was where they wanted to spend their lives together. They wanted to start their careers there and raise their family there. Stanley was a commercial photographer looking for a home that could double as a photography studio, and Julie had an in-home daycare center for toddlers. During the 70s, Soho, New York was an area that was kind of ignored by many and considered cheap. Artists from all over were flocking to that area to purchase lofts that could double as studio spaces and as homes. The couple was able to save up enough money and purchase a very spacious loft overlooking the streets of Soho for $7,500. But this loft needed lots of work, but it had potential, so they added new plumbing, new floors, and new walls. The space came together as a home, and Stanley was also able to create a studio for his photography, while Julie was also able to have room for her in-home daycare. The kids went to the local school in Manhattan, and although Etan was only 6 years old in 1979, he was yearning for more freedom in his life. He had reached the age where he wanted to dress himself every morning and wanted to start doing things on his own without his siblings or without his parents accompanying him, give me my space, let me do my thing. He had been begging his parents the entire year to let him walk alone to the bus stop as well. He was in first grade, and by that time, so many other kids his age were doing it. And when you're younger and you see other kids doing something, you want to experience those freedoms too. You want to feel cool like them, not like you're being babied with your parents. But Julie still felt that it just wasn't the right time yet. He was too young, she was too protective, she wasn't feeling great about it. But then the morning of May 25th, 1979 came around, and this was a more hectic morning. It was the last day of school before Memorial Day weekend, and all of the kids were excited and just so ready for the fun summer days ahead. Julie woke up around 7 a.m., and by the time that she had gotten up, Etan was already practicing some of that independence that he was seeking and craving. He had dressed himself in blue pants, a t-shirt, bright blue sneakers with fluorescent green stripes up the sides of them, and a baseball cap which read Future Flight Captain, and it had recently become his absolute favorite hat to wear. Stanley had already left for downtown and was working on some photography for the day. Julie was tending to 2-year-old Ari and another toddler that she had babysat the night before, and was expecting more kids to arrive at any moment. She was pouring cereal in the kitchen for Etan, juggling the 2 babies, and trying to get Etan's older sister Shira out of bed, but unsuccessfully. Etan could tell that Julie was struggling and decided he would try his luck again, and offered once more to walk to the bus stop alone, since she had clearly looked a little bit busy. If he felt like maybe now's my chance, maybe now she'll give in. So after some thought, she gave in, and Etan was ecstatic. He couldn't wait to tell all of the other kids at school that he had finally walked to the bus stop by himself. He grabbed his tote bag that a friend's mother had given to him, filled it with his toy cars and a $1 bill that Julie had given him to get a soda on the way, and then he was waiting by the door for Julie to unlock it and let him go, since he was still too short to reach the locks. Julie walked him outside, kissed him goodbye, and gave him a hug, then went about her normal day. But that day was anything from normal, because Etan didn't come home after school like he always did. And Julie had no idea that morning when she kissed her son goodbye, that it would be the last time, and she had no idea what was to come. By 3:30 that afternoon, Etan had not made it home yet, and Julie was already beginning to panic. In the neighborhood that they were living in, there were many families that also had converted industrial spaces into lofted homes. Etan knew many of the kids that lived nearby, and some were even in the same class as him. So Julie thought that Etan had maybe gotten a little too carried away with his freedom and had stopped at a friend's house on the way home instead of going straight home like he always does. She called a friend named Karen Altman to ask if Etan was at her house, but Karen's daughter Chelsea, who was in the same class as Etan, overheard their conversation, and she chimed in saying that Etan hadn't been to school that day. And this is when Julie knew that something had gone terribly wrong.
It had to be at least 3 o'clock. Julie called and she said that Etan had not come home from school. I was probably down here in about 15 minutes and came up here, and
it's all still right there, isn't it?
The Patz lofted home quickly filled up with friends, family, and officers who turned the home into a sort of communication center and home base. Stanley and Julie printed off countless posters with Etan's photo on it, posting them all over Lower Manhattan. Officers went door to door asking if anyone had seen this little boy on the morning of the 25th. People close to the family, and even those not so close, gathered to search high and low across town for him. At that time, the laws were also a little lax, so officers actually ended up going inside apartment buildings and searching room to room in people's homes for any signs of Etan. The case shook all of New York City. People who didn't even know Etan began to imagine their kid's face on these missing posters, since they too let their kids walk to school, go to the bus stop, go to their friends' houses all by themselves. They didn't think for a second that anything would ever happen or that it wasn't safe. If Julie had, she surely wouldn't have let Etan walk out of the front door that morning.
In the early days, you and your wife took a lot of criticism about letting Etan go by himself that day. That must have been tough.
well, we did, but at some point in every parent's life, they send their children to school alone.
Yeah.
Did we do it too early? Obviously we did. It was very familiar territory. This was a very safe neighborhood. When you let them out of your sight, when they're 21?
There were no surveillance cameras on every corner to easily look into what direction Etan had even gone in. The police's only hopes were to talk to people and hope that little by little, based on any information or things that people had seen, they could start to put together a possible timeline or even figure out the direct route that Etan had gone that morning. In the first few weeks of the initial investigation, suspicion began to fall on a particular Jamaican building superintendent. This man was known to have been friendly to Etan, saying hello when he passed and also making jokes with him. It very quickly became obvious that the man knew nothing, though, and had been nothing more than just a kind person to a child passing by. But suspicion likely rose due to his nationality and the fact that he worked out of a building nearby the family loft, which housed New York City's first gay erotic art gallery. A postman as well as another witness claimed to have seen Etan walking from their home at 113 Prince Street to a school bus stop less than 2 blocks away at East Broadway. A woman who stood at the same bus stop that Etan was heading to said that he never even arrived at the bus stop, leading investigators to believe something must have happened to him in between his home and the bus stop. Police began canvassing the area, interviewing people who lived and worked nearby, just hoping that maybe they would have seen Etan, maybe seeing him talking to someone or turning a different way to go somewhere other than the bus stop, but nobody did. Then months went by, and within the first 2 months, over 1,000 tips had come in, but they were all dead ends. The lead detective, William Butler, had interviewed more than 200 people and even spoke with several psychics who claimed to have knowledge on Etan's last whereabouts that morning. The leads came in heavy for around 2 weeks, totaling to at least 100 per day, if not more. But then very quickly, it dropped to just 6 to 7 per day. The Patz family felt like people were already forgetting about their young son. On October 22, 1979, just a few weeks after Etan's 7th birthday, police released sketches of a man who they thought might have vital information regarding Etan's case. This was the first huge development in the case in months. It had been months since Etan had disappeared. The drawing was based on a description that a woman had given to police. You see, the woman claimed that she had seen Etan walking to the bus stop that morning and claimed that she saw this man talking to Etan. She noticed that when she saw the interaction, it had been about 3 blocks from the Prince Street intersection where Etan had last been reported as being seen. The man was described as a white man around the age of 40. He was more on the thin side with blonde hair and had blue eyes. He was described as having distinct large freckles on his face as well as beauty marks. The woman was later hypnotized to see if she would be able to recall any more information, but his height and weight was not estimated. Police had learned this information a while prior, but they were afraid of releasing a sketch because they thought it would possibly send whoever this man was running out of town. They had hoped that they could find him without drawing in the attention of the media. After searching door to door and not finding anyone who looked similar or knew of anyone that fit the description, they turned to the public as their last option. Now, this sketch was shocking to the family because they knew nothing about it and learned about it when everybody else in the public did. Julie was very quick to tell reporters, though, that she was adamant about the importance of it since there had been so many leads and reports that turned out to be dead ends. I think maybe she just didn't want to get her hopes up. I don't know. A few years after Etan had disappeared, in March of 1982, a man named Jose Antonio Ramos was arrested for attempting to lure 2 young boys into the drainage pipe tunnel where he had been living. Jose was a Puerto Rican American born in the Bronx in 1943. He was the oldest of 5 brothers and admitted to having sexual relations with at least one of his younger brothers when they were children. He dropped out of high school and enlisted in the Navy in 1960, and by the time the 70s came around, he had become somewhat of a drifter. He sold cheap jewelry and children's toys to make enough money to eat. He had long, unkempt hair and bore a very physical resemblance to Charles Manson. He didn't care to live on the streets, hence why he had made a drainage pipe his home. When police arrested him, they found several photos of young boys with blonde hair similar to Etan, but none of the photos were Etan. But they still asked him about his interest in young boys and if he knew anything about Etan and his disappearance, which was almost 3 years prior.
Stuart Grabois says that you like, particularly, young boys with blonde hair and blue eyes, like Etan Patz.
Well, Stuart Grabois can say anything he wants to say.
You never had a particular fascination for blonde hair, blue eyes, young boys?
No, I wasn't into the Viking thing, if that's what you're trying to say.
He claimed that he knew nothing about his disappearance, but admitted to once having a relationship with a woman named Sandy Harmon. And it turns out that Sandy knew the Patz family. More specifically, she had been the woman to walk Etan and other neighborhood kids to school during the 1979 bus strike. When investigators looked deeper into Jose, they found out that during the time he was with Sandy, he didn't even go by Jose. He went by Michael. And Michael had actually been watching the news with Sandy the evening of the 25th when Etan's young happy face was all over the news as a missing child. After seeing this news report and apparently becoming so full of emotion, he actually had gone out and been a part of those initial search parties that night for Etan. Now, as if this connection wasn't crazy enough, investigators found in the drain pipe a letter addressed to Jose Antonio Ramos, and the address was on the Lower East Side, very close to where Etan and his family was living. To Julie, Stanley, and others involved in the case, it seemed like too many coincidences, but the police didn't feel the same way.
In the garbage near Mr. Ramos's pipe, I found a letter.
There was an envelope from the Social Security Administration that was addressed to Jose Antonio Ramos, and an address on the Lower East Side that was really kind of less than a mile from the Pates home. You marry that up with the association with the babysitter, and now you have something that you really need to look at.
When you were out there in the drain pipe and you're seeing these connections, didn't you want to press this further than the cops were taking it?
I pressed it to the extent you could press it, and at some point, you know, you got the wave off that we don't think there's anything here.
When investigators interviewed Sandy, she broke down into tears and explained that the real reason their relationship had broken off was because Jose had only dated her to get to her young son, who he ended up sexually violating during their relationship. However, she never pressed charges against him, but she was aware of what he had done. It was very clear that Jose was an evil man that had a thing for young boys. Plus, he had a personal connection to Etan and was also part of the searches for him. But was he responsible for his disappearance? Etan's parents had begged investigators to look into Jose's drainage pipe when they learned that he kept children's toys in there. They told detectives that they would know Etan's personal toys and toy cars that he had taken that day with him, but they refused, saying that they didn't want to give the couple any false hope. After Jose was released after the incident with the two young boys, he virtually went off the radar. It's easy for us now with our cell phones doubling as basically GPS tracking devices to see our every movement, but remember that in the 70s and the 80s, it was very easy for someone in such a big city to just get lost, to disappear. It wasn't until years later that investigators even realized that after he was released, he had been living in an empty store space just 10 blocks away from the Patz family loft. Now, there is a good chance that he would have been able to stay lost and out of the eye of detectives for a long time. That would be if his sick ways hadn't coerced him out of hiding. Times Square during the 80s had a place nicknamed Playland, which was a hotspot for pedos, like ultra hotspot. One night in August of 1982, 5 months after he had been released, Jose was caught in the act of soliciting sex from 3 male minors between the ages of 9 and 12, which led to him going right back into police custody. Instead of being put in a jail cell and authorities throwing away the key, though, he was sent to Rikers Island for a psych evaluation. After several months of jail observation, he was given a clean bill of mental health, and instead of charging him with a sex crime, prosecutors dismissed his case, and he was again released out into the world, allowing him to disappear once again. It seemed he was determined to not get caught, though, this time. After he was released, he left New York behind and ended up in Michigan. Upon arriving in Michigan, he showed up at a family reunion for a group of people called the Rainbow Family. This was a group of people who were hippies, New Agers, and other drifters that had annual family gatherings. Police noted that Jose spent a lot of time with the children, handing out Star Wars figurines and trading cards, but some of their older members felt an odd vibe from him and asked him eventually to leave. And this case wasn't only shaking New York City up, but the entire United States. Former President Ronald Reagan declared May 25, 1983, the first National Missing Children's Day, all done in honor of Etan, who had disappeared 4 years prior. By 1984, the entire country was looking for ways to get missing children's photos and information out to the public in ways that they had never thought of or done before. This was when the National Child Safety Council created the campaign to put photos of missing children on milk cartons nationwide. And Etan was actually the first child to ever have been on one of those cartons. 2 years after the first Rainbow Family reunion, Jose showed up to another Rainbow Family reunion in the woods of the Mark Twain Forest in Missouri. But this time, he was traveling with a young, light-haired teenage boy. He again focused on the children, was handing out toys and trading cards, but they had remembered him from the last time. They took his photograph and asked him to leave, but before he had left, he had managed to create a sort of friendship with a couple from Erie, and also a couple who had 2 young boys. Now, this friendship would lead him to showing up to the couple's home multiple times unannounced. Each time he would offer to do work around the house for them, such as painting, fixing things, watching the kids, and this relationship eventually led the couple to trusting Jose, and they asked him to babysit their 2 young boys once while they were out of town. This would end up being their biggest mistake because it was later found out that he had sexually harmed the children while under his care during that time. But by the time the parents knew about it, Jose had already been long gone. To everyone's shock, Jose actually had the balls and the nerve to show up to the next reunion after being kicked out twice before and harming 2 of the children. So they immediately contacted the authorities, who were able to intercept him near Route 80 in Shippensville, Pennsylvania. He was arrested and charged with multiple things related to sex crimes. He had confessed to sexually violating a child on his bus that he had been traveling and living in, but because police had failed to read him his Miranda rights, his confession had to be thrown out, and the case was dropped, allowing Jose to once again be a free man.
What did happen in that bus in 1986?
I don't feel that a description is warranted on something that's perverted. But however, I will tell you that what happened there happened because I had too much lust inside me.
But you know the story. A tiger doesn't change its stripes, or a leopard doesn't change its spots. Thankfully, the following year, Jose was arrested and convicted of harming the 2 young boys from Erie, and he was sentenced to prison at Rockview State Penitentiary in Bellefonte, Pennsylvania. When he was sentenced, his bus had been impounded, claimed as abandoned, and sold to a dealer who towed it away and cleaned out all of Jose's contents. In the bus was a diary of Jose's that was quickly flipped through and then thrown into a fire to dispose of it, along with the rest of Jose's trash and belongings. Now, that diary could have held crucial evidence about Etan's disappearance, or it could have also had nothing in it. But the worst part is that we will never be able to know. Meanwhile, Etan's family was still searching and looking into leads daily. They had not forgotten or given up on their baby boy. No progress had been made in Etan's case, though. The only thing that had changed over the years was that there was a new district attorney in office named Stuart Grabois, and he was known to be a no BS type of guy. He dedicated his time to looking into every possible lead in the case, even the ones that seemed super far-fetched and not worth the time, which all of these would lead him back to Jose. Now, it would be much easier to speak with Jose this time around since he was already in jail. So Stuart arranged for Jose to be transported from Pennsylvania to his Manhattan office. This all happened in 1988. Jose seemed more than eager to be back in New York City, even if he was handcuffed to a heavy chair in the district attorney's office. He acted giddy and even responded to some questions in a sing-song type of accent. He thought that he had been brought in to talk about taxes that he never paid for selling people's garbage that he found on the streets. But Stuart let him think that and then just continued talking to him about his life on the streets, and what he did to make money. At one point, Stuart picked up a piece of paper and acted like he was thoroughly reading it before he finally asked Jose, "How many times did you have sex with Etan Patz?" Stuart recalled Jose's face going white, and for the first time since he had been rambling on about his time in New York City, he had finally become speechless. When Jose said nothing, Stuart said to him, "Don't lie to me, Jose." This prompted Jose to start opening up about a small, blonde-haired boy that he had picked up in Washington Square Park on the day that Etan went missing. He said that he talked to the boy for a little while and then invited him back to his apartment. When he was asked why he would do that, he admitted that it was to take advantage of the boy sexually. Jose clearly began to get worried because he immediately stopped cooperating and told Stuart that he put the child unharmed on a subway to Washington Heights. Then he refused to admit to anything else. Stuart felt in his heart like he had the person who did something to Etan, yet he couldn't get a confession out of him. Jose knew what he was doing and wouldn't admit to anything. Stuart even set up jailhouse stings, but had no luck. Stewart wasn't the only person who believed that Jose had something to do with Etan's disappearance. Both Stanley and Julie also felt that Jose was responsible, but with no evidence, no body, no confession. There was little that they could even do about it. They worried that once he got out of jail in Pennsylvania, he would continue his habits and his long history of hurting more children. In 2001, with Stewart advising them, Stanley and Julie filed for Etan to be presumed dead. A judge ruled that Etan had died on the day that he vanished. And just like that, after 2 decades of searching for answers as to what happened to Etan, the case went ice cold. The Patz family had done this with a plan in mind, though. By having Etan officially be declared as dead, they would be able to file a wrongful death lawsuit against Jose, which would possibly lead to Jose's parole being taken away. The ultimate goal here was to make sure that no other children or families were ever hurt by Jose again, even though he still denied having anything to do with Etan's disappearance. In 2004, Judge Barbara Kapnick of the state Supreme Court granted a judgment in the wrongful death suit against Jose simply because he did not comply with an order that she made over a year prior to answer questions under oath about Etan's disappearance. Evidence in the civil suit included statements made by a prison informant who claimed that Jose said, and I quote, "Etan is dead. There is no body, and there never will be a body." He also told him a story of taking Etan back to his apartment and sexually violating him. Stanley and Julie's attorney wrote to Jose's parole officer discussing the decision made in the suit in hopes that they would not allow him to get out of prison on parole before his 20-year sentence was up for that previous case involving the 2 boys. He also wrote Justice Kapnick, pleading for an order to never allow Jose to be near children again after his release. It seemed like that was as close as Etan's family would ever get to any justice or answers, until 2010, when his case was shockingly reopened. A new team of prosecutors and an FBI agent were assigned to Etan's case in January of 2010, and they immediately got to work. Old interviews were combed through, old evidence was re-examined, and a fresh round of interviews began. Even though all the eyes had been on Jose for decades, they decided there was no harm in putting their attention into other people of possible interest in this case. Julie pleaded for investigators to look into a man named Othniel Miller. At the time of Etan's disappearance, Othniel was a carpenter and handyman living in the Patz family's building. Julie said that she had once considered him to be a family friend. His workshop had once sort of been a play place for kids in the neighborhood, since there weren't any parks close to the building as well. He had actually been interviewed after Etan's disappearance, and police had even looked briefly into the basement decades earlier. But after a quick look and what seemed to be a credible alibi at the time, police moved on to other people, and they never looked back. Othniel was always friendly towards Etan, but 3 very important things led investigators to believe that he might be worth looking into again. The first was that his ex-wife told detectives that she divorced him because he allegedly sexually violated her niece 10 years after Etan went missing. The second was the fact that Othniel had hired Jose many times to do little odd jobs around his workshop. And the third was that Othniel did some sudden and large renovations to the workshop shortly after Etan's disappearance. This was a bit odd since the place was pretty well put together already and didn't seem to need any sort of apparent renovations. Could the fact that Jose worked for Othniel at one point possibly connect the 2 together in more ways than just friends? Did they both know more about Etan and what actually happened to him that day in 1979? When the FBI went back to Othniel and told him that their dogs had picked up the scent of possible human remains, the first thing that came out of his mouth was what if the body was moved. Othniel and his ex-wife divorced in 1986. She claimed that it was due to what he did to her niece, but Othniel's stepson, Jason Webley, was quick to speak to media and said, "That's not true. He loved children. She made that up. She's a liar. She's sick in her head. She's crazy. I guess she's still bitter and angry about their past relationship." Jason even went as far as claiming that Othniel had broken off the marriage first and that the sexual accusations were a type of petty payback for the divorce. He told the media that he knew of the niece very well and that she never told him about any of these accusations. Plus, no charges were ever filed. Which we all know that really isn't a good justification as to why the allegations aren't true, since many people are very afraid of not being believed and are just in general afraid of their perpetrators. So they never press charges. They never tell anyone. So that's not really an argument to stand on, in my opinion. In 2012, the FBI decided that it was time to search the basement of Othniel's workshop. They brought in cadaver dogs, and special odor-absorbing pads were placed throughout the room. Police dogs were able to capture scent by using these pads. After the dogs picked up a scent, the new goal was to completely dig up the concrete in the basement in hopes of possibly finding Etan's body.
There was a hit, a cadaver dog hit on the location, and a decision was made to go forward with more intense excavation.
We don't really know whether the dogs are alerting in a reliable way, because clearly, in addition to human decomposition, animal decomposition may cause an alert as well, and there may be other factors. So it is questionable as to whether there really is a body in the location that they are digging.
After digging up the concrete, they continued with the foundation under it, and they were seen literally dumping bucket after bucket of dirt and foundation. Othniel's workshop had been so close to the Patz family home that Julie and Stanley had a perfect view of the entire operation the whole time, and they were often seen watching from their window and their fire escape. And I cannot imagine the feeling of the FBI being literally right under my nose and being able to watch them and wonder if they had just found my child, so close to home after all of these years. After days of digging up the basement, digging through the foundation, and even ripping down parts of the drywall to expose the brick walls that were there when Etan went missing, only one thing was found. There was a stain on a piece of the wall that was tested and came back, but it was not containing any traces of blood. 2 bins full of rubble and concrete were taken to a landfill in Staten Island that were to be kept in case investigators wanted to re-examine it. Although the FBI didn't find Etan's body, it turned out that the search had not been for nothing. The search was all over the news and all across social media platforms, and just like that, Etan's story was being told to a whole new group of people who may not have ever even heard of this case before. Just days after the search ended, a call was made to the missing persons squad, and this call led them directly to a man named Pedro Hernandez. Pedro's brother-in-law had actually been the one to call the police after he realized that some things that Pedro had been saying over the years could now be connected to Etan's disappearance. Pedro was just 18 years old when Etan first vanished. He had recently dropped out of high school, and he was working as a store clerk in a bodega near West Broadway and Prince Street, which was right near Etan's bus stop. Just days after Etan's disappearance, he moved back to where his family was living in New Jersey, and he got a job at a dress factory. After moving back to New Jersey, he had gotten married, had a few children, and led what seemed to be a pretty normal life. Normal except for the fact that he had been making odd claims as far back as 1981 to several different people. Shortly after moving back to New Jersey, he joined a local church and decided to go on a church retreat that they were having. At the retreat, he fell to his knees in tears, and he confessed to one of the church elders, as well as to a group of people in the prayer group, that he had killed a young boy. After this incident, he also confessed to his ex-wife before they had gotten married. His ex-wife said that he used the term muchacho, leading her to believe that it had been a teenage boy, not a young child. Another one of his friends claimed that he told him that it was a young black boy. A family member claimed that he had told him, and I quote, "He did a bad thing and killed a child in New York." Despite the different accounts, there was one thing in common, and it was the fact that he had told multiple people in the past few decades about killing a child, and yet nobody said or did anything until 2012, when Etan's face and story were plastered all over the news. After Pedro's brother-in-law called law enforcement and told them everything he knew, they immediately jumped into action and brought Pedro in for questioning. He was with the detectives for several hours. He was playing dumb and acting fake cooperative, but then something must have changed though. Whether he realized this was something he could no longer get out of, or maybe he began feeling some sort of genuine remorse, he finally told detectives everything. Pedro confessed that on May 25th, 1979, he saw Etan walking to the bus stop while he was working at the bodega. He lured Etan into the basement of the bodega, promising him a soda, which Etan was more than excited about, and then he willingly followed him down the stairs below. Once Etan and Pedro were both in the basement and far away from any other people, Pedro attacked Etan, grabbing him by the neck and choking him. However, he would not come out and specifically say that he choked Etan to death. He was claiming that he was still alive when he put his body inside of a large plastic bag. Once he was inside of the bag, he says he put the bag inside of a box to conceal it and then dumped the box in the alley about a block away, meaning that until the garbage trucks came and picked up trash in that specific area, Etan's poor little body was just blocks away from his family and all of the search parties in the beginning days of his investigation. A woman who ran a playgroup in Soho near the bodega during the time that Etan disappeared had told investigators that at the time, she had noticed the insane amount of garbage bags and boxes out on the streets, especially because it was Memorial Day weekend. She said that for 3 days, everyone piled up bags on the streets and they just stacked and stacked until they came and picked them up, saying, "I always thought there were so many garbage bags out, and why did they not search them?" Based on this eyewitness account, it seemed as if he had just blended in, and unfortunately, it was just too easy to conceal his body before it was discarded forever. After this confession from Pedro, authorities announced that after 33 long and grueling years, an arrest was finally made in the Etan Patz case. 51-year-old Pedro was arrested and charged with second-degree murder. Before authorities made the news public, they told Julie and Stanley, who were absolutely shocked and taken aback by this. Authorities discovered that Pedro was mentioned in a detective's report from 1979 as being one of the workers at the bodega near the bus stop. Many of the workers were interviewed during that time, but shockingly, Pedro was not one of them. Current detectives have no answers as to why he was not interviewed. Whether it's a simple answer and he just simply wasn't one of them chosen to be interviewed, or maybe he had moved on to New Jersey before they ever could, they have no idea. People who knew Pedro in New Jersey were more than shocked to discover the news. He and his current wife, Rosemary Hernandez, were both Pentecostals at the time of his arrest and lived in a modest 2-story apartment in Camden, New Jersey. Their neighbor who rented the front half of the apartment claimed that the couple hosted many holiday parties for friends and family members and often spent time together sharing chores like mowing the lawn, raking the leaves, and clearing the snow. He said they were good people. He was a good person. Being a good person, though, couldn't be farther from the truth, and other than telling a few people about hurting a child, he had also been displaying signs of a more ominous person beneath the nice guy facade. His lawyer and wife claimed that he is simply a man with schizophrenia, bipolar, hallucinations, and delusions who confessed to a crime that he did not commit. However, other family members and people around Pedro told a very different story. Pedro's sister Norma told investigators that in retrospect, she remembers when they were younger, Pedro would always say odd things, like that if he ever had a son, he would keep him locked in a basement. Another relative by marriage told investigators that while he never did anything specifically to make her feel this way, she always got an odd vibe from him and never wanted him near their children. Records show that his ex-wife as well as his current wife had both at one point too had protection orders against him, and he rarely had any interactions with his children from his first marriage. As if all of that wasn't enough to convince you that he was just an all-around terrible person, his father, Esteban Hernandez, even said on his deathbed that he hopes Pedro repents for the little kid that he did wrong. After months of investigating Pedro's confession, the prosecution decided to move forward with a murder prosecution in November. On November 14, 2012, a grand jury charged Pedro with second-degree murder. Although they found no physical evidence to corroborate his story, they believed that his confession alone would be sufficient evidence. Prosecutors reviewed over 20 years' worth of medical reports and believed that his confession was not a result of mental illness and that it would stand up in trial. Now, I know we've been talking an awful lot about Pedro, but let's not forget Jose was a lead suspect in this case for many years. But law enforcement just never had a confession or physical proof to pin it to him. By the time all of this was circulating in the news, Jose had finished his 27-year-long sentence for his sexual deviance that happened in Erie. He was released and rearrested, though, because the address that he told authorities he would be living at was found to be a complete lie. Megan's Law requires that anybody on the registry provide an up-to-date and accurate residence. He told police that he would be living with a cousin in the Bronx, but when police showed up to the residence, the cousin no longer lived there, and nobody knew who Jose was. Once they finally found the cousin that he was supposed to be living with, she told authorities that she has not seen or spoken to him in almost 35 years, and also that he was not welcome in her home. Hiding was also now much harder than it used to be, so he was very quickly found and arrested. He was held on a $75,000 bond that he was not able to post. Now, if you'll remember from earlier, Jose had done some odd jobs for Pedro during the time that Etan went missing. He declined to comment or do any interviews with the press regarding Pedro's arrest, but he was not getting off that easy. Jose was ordered in court on October 25, 2013, to speak at Pedro's trial as a material witness. However, this was later thrown out. 1 month after Jose's court order to be a witness at Pedro's trial, more information came out, according to court documents, all regarding Pedro's troubled past, which prosecutors believed would help their case even more. We knew before that his ex-wife and current wife both had protective orders against him at one point, but we didn't know the story behind those orders. Court documents claimed that Pedro had actually hit his wife with a diaper pail, punched her in the ear, choked her with a vacuum cord, and one time intentionally tried to crash a car with her inside of it, claiming, "I'm going to kill us all, I hate my life." He apparently also had a long history of cocaine abuse, which his lawyer clarified he had been clean from since 2007. Pedro had also admitted to sexually violating a family member, and both a neighbor and another family member corroborated this story. However, the victim denied that it ever occurred. Whether or not Pedro's confession could be used in his trial was a huge point of contention between prosecutors and the defense. A hearing was held on September 15, 2014, and it was expected to last a month, where Pedro's confession tape was played in court and made public for the very first time. Etan's mother left the courtroom before the tape was played, and Stanley was seen sitting in the second row, looking extremely worn down and sad during the video being played. Pedro had no emotions and just sat motionless, watching himself confess to such a disgusting crime.
And what were you, again, what were you thinking?
When I grabbed him, I shook him. I tried to let go, but my body was shaking and jumping at the same time. And I wanted to let him go, but it was something to cover me, and I was squeezing more and more.
And then what happened?
And then he went like this. And he kind of went down, and I put him in the bag.
Before he went down, when you have your hands on his neck, before he went down, did he make any sounds?
He was just gone. Like he didn't breathe. Nothing. No other sound.
Pedro's lawyer, Harvey Fishbein, argued that his client gave a false confession due to his mental illnesses and also a low IQ of 70. He claimed that Pedro was coerced, and since he was so uncomfortable and uneasy, he just confessed. As you can see just from that video clip, though, nobody was yelling at Pedro or accusing him of anything, and he looked extremely calm while he was telling the story. Pedro also confessed multiple times, once at a court hearing, so it wasn't at all that he was just confessing one time under pressure.
You didn't go into the store with him, you went down to the basement with him, and he followed you, or you said come down to the basement with me?
No, he followed me.
And where were you going to get the soda from?
In the basement. There was a fridge in the basement.
So he went down the stairs, and he was behind you, is that right?
He was behind me. Then he went in front of me. I stood behind him. And I choked him. Then when I choked him, I started shaking. And there was a plastic bag and a box. Where did it came from? I do not know. It was there. So I put him inside the bag. Then I tied the bag with the same bag. I put him inside the box. It was like a banana box, something, I don't remember. What kind of box was it? It was a cardboard box. I put him up on my shoulder. I carried him out of the store, out to like a block away, a block and a half away from the store. There was people following me from the basement. All the people that were there at the same time when he was there. They followed me out. I put him like a block and a half away. I set him up on the basement, in the hallway. And I walked back to the store and I started working just like nothing.
His lawyer knew that the confession tape was all they had on him, though, and he did everything he could possibly do to get it thrown out. On November 25th, 2013, after over a month of court hearings, the judge ruled that Pedro waiving his Miranda rights and speaking without a lawyer present was knowing and intelligent. The confession tape would be used in Pedro's trial. The judge claimed that he based this ruling off Pedro's ability to make his way in the world over a period of almost 40 years. This was a huge success for the prosecution and for Etan's family. His trial was scheduled to begin with a grand jury selection on January 5th, 2015. January 5th came, and 100 jurors were given a lengthy questionnaire to complete, including a list of over 131 witnesses and others who would all be a part of the trial. He told them that the trial would last 2 to 3 months, which was a huge shock for absolutely everyone. The judge also told the jurors that they would not automatically be disqualified if they had heard about the case due to its huge publicity in the media over the past few decades, and said that they would have to promise to keep an open mind and not allow themselves any prejudice based on the things that they had heard before. The judge told the courtroom that the jury selection process could take weeks, and opening statements were expected to begin on January 20th. Just a few weeks later, the trial began. On February 2nd, Etan's mother, Julie, testified, which was extremely hard for a lot of people to hear. She had stayed out of the public eye for almost 15 years, letting Stanley do any press, but on that day, she came out of hiding. The then 72-year-old Julie began describing Etan's early life, his trusting personality, his love for photography, and the daily things that he would do in the Soho neighborhood in the 70s. She told the courtroom that she watched Etan walk a block away, remembering that dollar bill in his left hand, before she turned and walked back into the loft. And that was the last time that she ever saw her son. She told the jury about how the bodega that Pedro worked at was a crammed, dark, dirty store where her son liked to go for candy and soda. She even said that her and other parents had told the children before to go into the bodega only in case of an emergency, never believing that would be the last place that they should have ever gone to. 4 days later, on February 9th, Pedro's ex-wife, Daisy Rivera, testified about some of the gruesome details that Pedro had shared with her prior to getting married. Daisy recalled that Pedro had come to her after a prayer circle in 1982, and he told her that he did not want there to be any secrets between them. She claimed he was very emotional and claimed that a muchacho had approached him. He said that he had felt violated, which Daisy took as a possible robbery attempt, and said that Pedro told her that it had gotten out of hand, resulting in him putting his hands around the person's neck and strangling him. He even told her that he had thrown the body in a dumpster and covered it with plastic bags. Years after the confession, when the two of them were married, Daisy actually found a photo of Etan in Pedro's personal belongings. Pedro told her that he had been familiar with the Patz family and that the child had disappeared near the area where he worked. Daisy finished her testimony by saying that she never told authorities about what Pedro had confessed, even when she took him to court over that child support and the restraining order, saying that she didn't because she didn't have any proof that he actually did it. A childhood friend of Pedro's also testified. Mark Pike said that Pedro had told him a story of a young boy throwing a ball at his throat while he was working at the bodega, and that he retaliated by strangling the kid. He said that Pedro had told him this story in 1979 or 1980, but that he did not believe anything that Pedro had said. So many people in this case knew for years about Etan, or at least that something very bad had happened to some child, and they never told the authorities for one reason or another. It's so incredibly sad and just insane to think that justice could have been served long ago, and maybe even Etan's body could have been recovered if it was still in the early stages of his disappearance. The next day, the videotape confession was played in court during the trial. They also watched a second video, which was filmed hours after the confession on a cell phone. In this video, Pedro had taken them to a spot at 115 Thompson Street in Soho, where he claimed to have left the body. The next 10 weeks of the trial was filled with testimonies from witnesses as well as family members and psychiatrists. Pedro's current wife, Rosemary Hernandez, and their daughter that they shared together, Becky Hernandez, both testified in court. Becky claimed that her father saw things that weren't there and that nobody else saw many times. She said she remembered stories of a lady in white who could walk into the house and pass through him like a ghost, a muscular man with tattoos who would choke him in bed, and shadows that became menacing figures that would stand by Rosemary and Becky. Becky added, "We knew he was not well. We didn't want to hurt his feelings. You know how children sometimes believe in something? That's kind of the reaction that we had." She said that Pedro was an overprotective father, but turned very controlling. She said he required her friends to make written requests to see her 2 weeks in advance, and that he wouldn't let her go unchaperoned even to the mall. He would hold her hand across the street even after she became a teenager, and he would accompany her to college classes every single day, waiting in the car until she was finished. She claimed that after Pedro confessed to the police, he told her and Rosemary the same story, but added that he dismembered Etan's body into tiny little pieces before disposing of it in the trash. Dr. Wellner was called to the stand to rebut 2 separate defense experts who testified that Pedro had a schizotype personality disorder, which made it hard for him to distinguish between reality and fantasy. Dr. Wellner testified that he found no evidence that Pedro was delusional when he told the prayer group in the 80s about killing a child in New York, as well as when he confessed to Daisy and Mark. He added, and I quote, "I do not think that he has any trouble distinguishing reality from fantasy." He claimed that while Pedro has some traits of a schizotypal personality disorder, such as hallucinations and eccentric beliefs, he more closely resembles borderline personality disorder, which is characterized by inappropriate rages and difficulty with personal relationships. It is also very common among people who commit crimes. 2 jailhouse informants testified for the defense, saying that Pedro had told them on 2 separate occasions about Jose being in Etan Patz's house with their babysitter Sandy, all in an attempt to pin the blame back onto Jose instead of Pedro. These attempts were easily disregarded. On May 5, 2015, the jury ended its 15th day of deliberations without a verdict, and a note to the judge announcing that they were deadlocked. The note read, "We, the jury, would like the court to know that after serious, significant, and thorough deliberations, we remain unable to reach a unanimous decision." The judge urged the jurors to keep deliberating and told them not to worry about whether or not their decision would be heavily scrutinized due to the massive public attention.
This has been unusual because usually when a jury deadlocks, they say, "We couldn't decide, we fought, we tried," and it's left at that. Not this time. This time it wound up being you against them. Why do you think that was?
I mean, essentially, it boils down to the evidence. The evidence was just not there in this case. And unfortunately, my fellow jurors felt that the story that was presented by the prosecution was a story that made the most sense. And in my opinion, you don't go with the story that makes the most sense, you go with the evidence. So it was very difficult, but it was a decision that I feel very comfortable with.
Why were you in such a different place than the rest of them? I know it was 10-2 for a while, you say, that there was you and another man who was holding out. So it's not just you, but it wound up being just you. Why wouldn't you go where they went?
Again, it's based on reasonable doubt and my understanding of reasonable doubt, which is a very high threshold for voting guilty in our country. I just feel that the other jurors had a much lower threshold for getting to that point of being willing to vote guilty in this case.
3 days later, on May 8, 2015, a mistrial was declared after jurors had said for a 3rd time that they could not reach a verdict, despite 3 weeks of deliberation. After the mistrial was announced, Stanley told reporters that he believed Pedro was the one who killed his son, and that he should absolutely be retried. He said, "I don't understand why the jurors couldn't come to a verdict, but I am convinced. This man did it. He said it. How many times does a man have to confess before someone believes him? It's not a hallucination."
Maybe Pedro Hernandez is a different man now that he's mature and 54, but when he was 18 years old, he did something terrible, and he should pay for that. That's why the story is so compelling. It makes sense from the beginning to the end. He was in the right place at the right time. He did a certain number of things, not because he's calculating and clever. He did them impulsively and whatever. It just worked out for him.
Over 1 year later, in October 2016, Manhattan prosecutors began the process of retrying Pedro Hernandez. And this time, prosecutors were determined to finally get justice for Etan. In February of 2017, Pedro was found guilty and sentenced to 25 years to life. After the verdict was announced, Stanley turned to Pedro and said, "Pedro Hernandez, after all of these years, we finally know what dark secret you had locked in your heart. You took our precious child and threw him in the garbage. I will never forgive you, and the God you pray to will never forgive you."
But we finally have found some measure of justice for our wonderful little boy, Etan. And I'm really grateful. I'm really grateful that this jury finally came back with what I have known for a long time, that this man, Pedro Hernandez, is guilty of doing something really terrible so many years ago. I have to thank the district attorney's office and these wonderful people behind me for doing such a thorough job that the only possible verdict was guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. Thank you all.
The 2004 civil suit against Jose being the cause for Etan's death was reversed. Pedro was in prison. Etan's family finally had received justice for what happened to their son almost 40 years prior. Since Etan disappeared, his family never wanted to leave the loft in Soho behind, afraid that one day Etan might be found or return home and they wouldn't be there. They saw the decades pass and watched Soho turn from a home of artists and hippies to high-class shops and boutiques.
Did you and your wife ever think about moving, ever?
No. For the longest time, we didn't know what had happened to him. We didn't know where he might be. So, of course, the thought in the backs of our minds was always that we should be here for him.
Once Pedro was arrested and found guilty, they finally found the piece that they had been searching for. They sold the loft for $4 million and moved to Hawaii, where their other son Ari had been living for quite some time. The chances of ever being able to recover Etan's remains are highly unlikely, but they do have answers and peace, which is all that they could ask for in a situation like this. Julie and Stanley can pass one day knowing what happened to their son. And this case goes to show the importance of speaking up, because so many people held the answers that the Patz family had been hopelessly searching for decades. Each one of them could have told authorities what they knew and possibly directed them toward Pedro much sooner. If Pedro's brother-in-law wouldn't have seen the news and put the clues together, Pedro might even still be walking on the streets, harming other kids. It is so unnerving to think about. And there's a lot of debate out there. People who think that Pedro and Jose were in on this together and that there was some sort of violation against Etan that happened in the bodega and that they both were responsible for the crime and the cover-up, although there has never been any proof tying Jose to the crime. But I'm curious to know what you guys think. Thanks for tuning in with me today. I know it was a little bit of a longer one, but I appreciate you sticking with me on it. Please don't forget on your way out to give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already so that you don't miss any other true crime cases. All right, guys, thanks again. And until the next one, stay safe.